opportunity to implement if-then planning. If they do this, then I'll respond by doing a specific action, which could include nothing, essentially extending the pause. Let's consider a relatable example from social media: scare pranks. You've likely seen videos where someone dressed as a plant suddenly moves to frighten the passersby. Picture this: the plant jumps up, and the startled victim immediately reacts with wild antics, dropping their belongings, stumbling, and trying to run. In mere milliseconds, this entire sequence unfolds. The initial stimulus is the sudden movement of the plant. This triggers an automatic reaction of surprise, quickly escalating to fear. The response is the brain's decision: escape at all costs. Finally, the action follows a frantic attempt to flee, often resulting in comically ineffective movement as the body struggles to keep up with the mental urgency. This rapid sequence highlights how a state of being, frazzled, calm, or otherwise, can directly influence how we respond to unexpected stimuli. Now let's replay the same scare prank, but this time through the lens of a highly trained operator, a person accustomed to remaining calm and deliberate under intense pressure. Imagine the prank. The plant suddenly moves, attempting to startle. The operator, walking alongside others, registers the stimulus, the sudden movement of the plant. Here's where training takes over. At the subconscious level, instead of reacting with surprise or fear, the operator's ingrained reaction is to immediately scan for context and threat level. They remain composed, their state of being unaffected. Their autonomic nervous system might briefly engage, but through training, they can pause unnecessary adrenaline spikes. A conditioned step so they can complete the assessment. They've already figured out it's not a tiger, so now they can take a little bit more time to make the assessment. The response follows swiftly. The operator determines the movement is non-threatening, recognizes it as a prank, and decides to disengage entirely or calmly acknowledge the situation. Now, you may have seen these videos and assume that the person who's calm walking by the frantic person set it up, maybe lured them into that situation. And maybe that's true sometimes. But if you watch carefully, you will see some of those people, you can actually see as they are processing in milliseconds, real time, what I just now described. Take a look at them differently. Now, I want you to go to the next step and recognize that this, while it may be physical, you may be seeing it, it's not muscle memory. It's a nervous system memory. Their nervous system has been trained, probably with myelination from 0 to 7, to respond that way to intense threats. This is important because if you see how frantic they become, imagine that that's what's going on in their brain, whether it's a plant moving or unpleasant news facing them. In other words, if you're in business and you have a threat that presents itself, if you respond internally in your mind to concepts, the way that person responds to the plants, you can understand how things can unravel. And that's part of the reason for this work, is because when you learn that responding that way is a choice, and you take control of it and you learn to respond with composure, you remove a big obstacle that exists between you going after self-actualization and your purpose. Because often it's the fear that we really don't know how we're going to respond, or we don't trust ourselves to respond to our best potential. This gets back to the bad day of a bad week. You want to be able to reach your best potential even on a bad day of a bad week, and that's at the core of this work. Finally, back to the operator. Their action reflects that response. They may continue walking, making a lighthearted remark to de-escalate the situation for others, or simply stay in place unfazed by the whole thing. While the untrained victim flails, the operator's conditioned habits, and it's important that it's conditioned because it's in the milliseconds, they're rooted in deep practice and deliberate decision-making, and that enables them to maintain clarity and composure. And this training can happen, as I said, in weeks, days at best, but weeks, and maybe a couple of months. The difference lies in their ability to process the same stimulus without letting it disrupt their state of being. Years of honing their stimulus response cycle with mindful interventions, stress inoculation, and myelin reinforcement have equipped them to act with precision, even in situations designed to provoke chaos. It's not about being emotionless. It's about control, acting, not reacting. Now, I mentioned that we can train this in weeks and maybe a couple of months. But the real learning occurs after that. It's deepening the practice. Just like a person can learn how to play tennis, but it might take them a year or two to learn to win, but they can play the game. And you can apply that to any sport. But again, it's not just physical, it's actually with our thoughts. So make the leap, learn the process in a month or two, and then hone it over time. So these two different approaches are often ingrained by age 27, shaping how people respond for the rest of their lives. With focused practice, it's entirely possible to rewrite that script. And this is where neuroplasticity comes into play, and especially myelin. Myelin is like the holy grail of behavior change. It breaks past paradigms. The connection between myelin and action lies in its role as the foundation for habit formation and skilled performance. Myelin, the insulating layer that wraps around neural pathways, strengthens with repetition, allowing signals to travel faster and more efficiently. Each time we execute a behavior aligned with our life vision, whether it's pausing to reassess in a challenging moment or implementing a thoughtful response, we lay down and reinforce myelin along the corresponding neural pathways or circuits. And this is why I say you can learn it in a month or two, but you're going to refine it and hone it over the next couple of years. Over time, this process not only makes these actions feel more natural, but also makes them more likely to occur even under stress, back to my bad day of a bad week. By deliberately focusing on the right actions, we're essentially training our brain to default to those behaviors, creating a strong, reliable framework for success in any moment. In this space between response and action, it's important to recognize that information from your subconscious is just a data point. By treating it as such, you reduce its influence and make room for conscious, deliberate assessment. Just as I've discussed reducing the power of external priming so you can strengthen your internal priming, you can reduce subconscious input to ensure that you're exercising your best thinking in any moment. By practicing and especially engaging in deep practice, you can make the desired response your go-to action. And remember, while this all makes sense with muscle memory, it's not actually muscle memory. It's nervous system memory. That is the magic of myelin. You're changing the nature of the neural pathways. Let's explore this concept further with some illustrations. Now, last week, I was talking about how we go from our state of being, which is created from our beliefs, our habits, our physiology, our priming, and our mindset. And in the prior episode, so this is number 70, we've been talking about this since 63, so you can go back there, where I spent an episode on beliefs, one on habits, one on priming, one on mindset. The physiology I didn't spend a lot of time with because there's enough written about that, but the short version is make sure you're drinking enough water so your brain gets the nutrients it needs easily. Otherwise, even slight hydration slows your blood down, and that makes it harder for the brain to get the nutrients it needs, mainly oxygen and nutrients, and it puts you in a stress response. It starts to put you in a stress response. And you can actually test this just by going for a week. As soon as you wake up, drink a half a liter of water. Just do an experiment, and note your mood, right? Note your level of brain fog or your level of clarity, whichever way you want to do it. Do that for a week, and then spend a week without drinking at all. No coffee, no nothing, for the first, say, half hour of the day. You'll notice that while you may think you need coffee or want coffee, if you just drink water, that feeling of needing coffee goes away because your brain is just starved for nutrients and is looking for the quick fix. Now, so that leads to our state of being, but because we have 30,000 plus decisions a day, this state of being becomes a habit itself. It becomes a personality, and that personality leads to how we respond to any given stimulus. This stimulus takes us to a reaction, and that could be a survival reaction. If it's a survival reaction, then you already have the cortisol, the adrenaline is already spiking. So one of the things we have to do is recognize that 99% of the threats that we face are not tigers on the Serengeti. So we don't need that level. So that's literally, we condition that in, and there's a positivity exercise that I talked about that we do there. And then from reaction to response, I talked about implementation intentions. And so this, on this side, is impulse, it's the subconscious, and on this side, it's thought, it's the conscious mind. Those are two different things, but because impulse, the impulse that goes through the neurons or neural pathways is energy, and thought is energy. So you can see how they have a similar signature, but there is a difference. You can actually tell once you start doing this work, you can tell when it's coming from your subconscious versus when it's coming from your conscious. And then once you can tell that, what's cool about it is there's a handoff that starts to happen in here, and it continues on to action. I'll get into another drawing in a moment. But in here, I said that you can use implementation intentions. If this happens, then I will do X. If that happens, I will do Y. If another thing happens, I'll do Z. Some of the words I threw out there, choice, we can implement or reframe. You can literally have an implementation intention where if something happens, you'll do a reframe. I used the example of if you're prone to judge people, you can condition in a step that right here that says, before I judge, let me imagine a situation that I did the same action and let me see what the situation is. It took me probably 30 seconds to say that, but we're conditioning it in at the subconscious level. Implementation intentions, we're actually telling the subconscious that before you hand this off to me, I want you to package it like this. The subconscious already does that. It's called meta programs. They package associations and then they do handoffs. Or they do handoffs to the next set of neurons. And this is when you start getting a lot of behavior